Hi guys, quick little video on our family's experience with cranial sacral therapy. Originally I sought it out for Ezra because why not? Also, I know that cranial sacral therapy works to kind of unlock any trauma that the body is holding on to, and whether you know it or not, we've all experienced some in some capacity. So that's why we got started with it. And it was like Ezra's third session that we had a pretty big breakthrough. And while the therapist is working on him, he's just playing. He doesn't even really know that she's doing any sort of work. There's times where he would get like uncomfortable and kind of move away from her, or maybe push against her, which she would encourage, almost like PNF stretching for like the tissue that surrounds your brain and the spinal cord. So I guess I should have probably started off with that as far as like what cranial sacral therapy is, and it is a manipulation of that fascia that encompasses the brain's hemispheres and your spinal cord, from the base of the brain to your tailbone, hence cranial sacral. Anyway, the most profound session that we had with Ezra was where she'd been working on him for a while, and like the last 10-15 minutes of it, he got really upset, meaning like he was crying. I was holding him. She was literally just hardly touching him. And she started kind of working on the left side of his skull. And that's where he started crying. Not like hard, but just pretty upset. And he turned his face into my bosom, my breast, and closed his eyes and started kind of like, almost like he was suckling at the breast. And it totally took me back to his birth. And also just whenever he was a baby, and this certain motion that he would do with his tongue after he'd fallen asleep from breastfeeding. And anyway, what's interesting about that is that spot that she was working on was where he had a really hard time getting out of the, he kept hitting my pelvis. So he had a hard time coming down the birth canal and just kept hitting the left side of my pelvis during birth or during labor. And they keep spiraling, babies keep spiraling down the birth canal, and he kept hitting, right? So there'd been some trauma in that area, and also they had put a scalp lead on him to monitor his heart rate because he was in some distress while in the birth canal. I now know that a scalp lead is more than what I thought it was, but that's different video, different time. Anyway, it was quite profound in the fact that like she found this spot and was allowed to work on it, even though he was like agitated. I was holding him and consoling him. And yeah, like I'll never forget that. That was the most insane, intense thing I've ever witnessed. So anyway, he ended up falling asleep, and we put him in his car seat, pretty much asleep, and he was a little like daisy for a little bit. He didn't end up staying asleep, but just kind of like chilled and mellowed out, which if you know Ezra, there is very few times of that. Anyway, and then another time, it was interesting that I had just seen my ART specialist the Thursday before our Saturday session for Ezra. And she had told me that my left pelvis was rotated forward and my right was rotated backwards, hence some of my discomfort. And then whenever we went Saturday to see our Ezra's cranial sacral therapist, now I say our cranial sacral therapist because Wynn and myself have also seen her. But anyway, that was like the first thing that she said whenever she started working on Ezra was, you know, well, the left side of his pelvis is tilted forward or rotated forward, and the right is, you know, tilted posteriorly. Anyways, it was one of those like, what? That's me. And she said, well, actually, that makes a lot of sense because family units are also tied together, meaning we have, oh, what's the right word to say here? We're all made up differently, but family units have similar rungs. That's kind of how she described it, and I don't know how else to say that. But time and time again, when I have an issue, Ezra also has it. And then we also noticed that there was a time whenever Ezra's left shoulder was like stuck, I should say. And she'd kind of done all the work that she needed to do on Ezra that day, so she went on to Win, and Win had the exact same issue. So our family units essentially we're tied together. And as one of us start to unravel, we kind of all start to unravel our trauma, I should say. So it's been interesting. Win has also had one session by herself, and one of the first things that she mentioned was, did she ever have a soft spot? And I said, actually, she didn't. So that was interesting that she picked up on that. And Win will probably go again. There's not a lot to work on necessarily, but she basically just says that Win is quite tight in the cranial area, so I'm also not surprised about that. When I went for myself, I had a really great session. It was interesting that, you know, things kind of started to soften and loosen. There was even a period where tears ran down my eyes, just as there was some relief. Not even relief, I should say release. And I told her at the end of the session, I said, I don't know how to explain this, but it's not pain, but at the bottom of my pelvis, there's just almost like a gentle sag. I don't really know how else to explain it. And she said, is it kind of like when you take your hair out of a ponytail? I thought, oh my God, yes. That was like the most perfect explanation of how that felt. Of like there'd been so much pent up energy, and after our session, I was just softer. So anyway, that's enough of this video. We're all doing well. Ezra's doing good. We're progressing. He's progressing. Some days are better than others. Some weeks are better than others. Sometimes we have some really big steps forward, and then sometimes it almost seems like there's a couple steps backwards, but nonetheless, we are pushing forward, and all is well. Thanks. Bye.